Okay, so I want to do an overview of some of the halachot of Purim Meshulash, some of the central sugyas. I took most of the stuff from Rev Rimon's book. If you saw, Rosh David was carrying the new version, which is like 10 times as big as the original version from when I was in yeshiva. But this was the original version of Purim Meshulash and Erev Pesach Shkolas B'Shabbos and Bir Maisrot, which I don't know why. I mean, I do know why it made it in, but anyways, okay. So as we know, or if we don't know, now we know. On a normal year, we read the Megillah in unwalled cities on Yudalit, and in walled cities on Tedvav, which practically in Israel means in most places we read it on Yudalit, in Yerushalayim, in like Tveria, you read it in on Tedvav. You know, we had a whole, when we moved in to Dagan a few years ago, we had a whole machlokes, because technically from Dagan we are contiguous to Yerushalayim through Beit Lechem, and you can, from certain angles, you can see Yerushalayim. So there was a whole, it was a whole challenge to try to figure out, are we actually part of Yerushalayim? We can see Yerushalayim. We can, yeah. So it was a whole thing, meaning there was someone in the shul who was like very, very convinced that we're part of Yerushalayim halachically. So he like printed out the maps on Google Maps, and he measured everything, and he showed how we are contiguous all the way to Yerushalayim, and therefore we're samach v'nireh. And he wrote to the chief, to Rav Yitzchak Yosef, to the Sephardi chief rabbi, who said, no, you're definitely not part of Yerushalayim. And then he sent a shliach to come and actually measure it, and he got there, he's like, well, on second thought, when actually seeing it, maybe you are. Rav Yitzchak Yosef then came up with a psak, which I don't fully understand, which was, since only Dagan and Tamar are samach v'nireh, but you're defined as part of the city of Efrat, and the rest of Efrat is not samach v'nireh, so you're batel to the rest of Efrat, which I don't really understand the whole canon, whatever. It was very interesting, but maybe one day. But the point is, so last year, L'chumra, we did have we had an extra Megillah reading at night, so I listened to the Megillah 4 times, because, for all people who think that Dati Leumi, modern Orthodox people, are, Mekilim, if you happen to be a Gush guy and learn by L'chum, you have all the Chumras of Brisk, even though you're not, Haredi Brisk, and therefore, my reflex is to be as machmer as humanly possible, and therefore, I heard the Megillah 4 times, out there in the cold at night. We had someone who was kacha inebriated, went through the Megillah as fast as he possibly could at night. It was interesting. But this year I don't have to worry about it, because this year, Baruch Hashem, we all know when I'm supposed to read the Megillah, which is on the 14th, on Friday. So I don't have to deal with the halachic problem of is Efrat part of Yerushalayim or not. I just have to deal with the problem of how do you deal with Purim on Friday, which is its own set of problems, its own set of practical problems. Either having the meal in the morning or Paris Mapa Mekadesh. I asked her again if you guys could do Paris Mapa Mekadesh. She said no. So basically the 2 ways in poskim of how you're supposed to do Suda on Erev Shabbos are either do it in the morning so that you're not Kovei Suda too close to Shabbos, or to start a dafka closer to Shabbos, planning to go into Shabbos, and when Shabbos starts, you pause, daven, make kiddush, and then continue your meal. That's Paris Mapa, you cover the food, umikadesh, you make kiddush, and then you continue the meal. So it's a machloket, which is the preferred method halachically. I think it's really annoying, because if you do it in the morning, at least after you guys finish doing whatever you do and however much you drink and whatever, and I don't want to know about it, I don't want to hear about it, but Rosh David can order the cleaning crew so that this place won't look like a wreck. If your meal goes into Shabbos, there's now a 25-hour dead zone where we have no idea what's happening to you, and we can't deal with the shul, and, all these things are not necessarily ideal, especially since we want to, be part of the student and then go back home, I have no idea. I don't know what the shul's policy is, right? Meaning, if the shul is open and you have a Tav Yarok, then presumably yes. But all the guys who had their chisun on Friday would have a Taiva Yerok. Or Thursday. But the guys Moshe Shabbos would have it started. Oh, Shabbos. So yeah, they would have it for Shabbos morning, not for Friday night.
But there are some people who got it a few days.
And the guys who got it on Sunday and Wednesday wouldn't be fine. Okay. So that's what we want to deal with. So the Gemara tells you in number 1, in Daf Dalet Amud Beis in Megillah, D'chulei Amo Megillah b'Shabbat lo karinon. Everybody agrees that Megillah is not read on Shabbat. My timer. Why not? So why not? So Amar Rabba Hakol Chayavin b'Kriyat HaMegillah Ve'ena Kol B'Kiyin Mikra Megillah. Because everybody is obligated in Mikra Megillah, but not everyone is an expert at reading the Megillah. And if this sounds familiar, you will remember that we spent way too much time on this sugya when you guys were in quarantine all the way at the beginning of the year with shofar. B'gzera derabba, gzera shema yitlena biyado v'yelech eitzel baki lilmod v'avirena arba amot b'rshut rabim. And we're worried that you will try to find an expert who will teach you how to read, and you'll end up carrying your Megillah in Rishut Rabim, V'hainu Taima de Shofar, and that's the same reason that we don't blow shofar on Shabbat. V'hainu Taima de Lulav, and we dealt with both of those other sugyot at the beginning of the year. Correct, Rami? You remember when we did that? Shofar, Lulav, we spent much time on this. And the sources that I didn't give you again were why only Shofar, Lulav, and Megillah. Why didn't we say it by Mila? Remember this?
Yeah.
So, do you remember it? Ezra, you want to remind us?
Well, one of the things, first there's like a
Good. So one possibility was that you can't go against an explicit head there, which even though it appears that we showed him, is more known as the sheet of the Taz. The Taz Hayadua, yes.
Also because you could say that if it was actually necessary to carry forward, so it's not if you needed, with that you'd be carrying to do the act as opposed to...
Correct. We saw some people distinguish between carrying to perform the mitzvah and carrying to remove the step. Very good.
How does that apply with lulav though? You don't know how to shake the lulav, what's that?
Yeah, you don't know how to shake the lulav. I don't know.
How you had that shaking palm drum,
yes.
That doesn't seem like...
Yeah, that's true of a lot of things. I don't know what you want me to tell you. Yeah. And we dealt with it at the beginning of the year. And then, we dealt with different questions, right? So one question was why we only deal with these. The second was why don't we forbid all these things on Yom Tov in general, right? Meaning Yom Tov also has restrictions. So why don't we just say you can never blow shofar? So one is obviously we don't want to get rid of the mitzvah. One answer we didn't address here, but Rav Rimon quotes it from his father-in-law, from Rav Blumenzweig. Rav Blumenzweig is the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Hesder Yerucham. So remember Yerucham? We were talking about possibly getting you vaccines in Yerucham before we got it in Modi'in, and I told you that if you drive into the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert, so the yeshiva, and I said there's a really good, very serious yeshiva there, that Yeshiva Hesder Yerucham, or just known as Yerucham, right? And the Rosh Yeshiva is Rav Elio Blumenzweig. So he gives an interesting formulation, which is, look, you're not going to forget about Rosh Hashanah by blowing the shofar, because that's the essence of Rosh Hashanah. So we're not going to tell you don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah because you might end up forgetting the laws of Rosh Hashanah. That doesn't make sense. Meaning, by blowing the shofar, it'll draw attention to the fact that it's Rosh Hashanah. And the same is true of shaking the lulav on Sukkot. The problem is when Yom Tov falls on Shabbat, we're worried that by focusing your attention on the mitzvah hayom of the Yom Tov, where you're allowed to carry, right, because it's Yom Tov, you'll forget that it's Shabbat because you're thinking in the mode of Yom Tov. You know how sometimes this happens, right? Like you forget that it's also Shabbos because, it's Pesach. right? Your identity in that day is not Shabbat, it's where is my challah? It's matzah, right? That's the way you think. So maybe that's the problem. Okay, fine. But at any rate, the Gemara says what you see is that we don't read the shofar on Shabbat, and we say the reason is Zira D'Rabba. Rabbi Yosef Amar Mibnei Aniyim Shel Aniyim Einehen Shel Aniyim Nisuo B'Mikra Megillah. Rabbi Yosef says no. The reason that you don't read the Megillah on Shabbat is because as soon as people read the Megillah, what happens? The poor people know it's time to get money. That people are generous on Purim, overly generous on Purim, because you're supposed to be, right? You're not supposed to investigate, and you're supposed to give money to anybody who asks, barring someone who you know is a fraud. No. We had this in YU. I've mentioned this before, right? The guy who we all knew was a fraud because, he would, during the week, he would dress as like a vagabond and be begging, and as soon as he knew that Shabbos came and we didn't carry money with us, suddenly you'd see him, right, in nice clothes, smoking and just hanging out. Yeah, like the guy would pretend to be like a frum guy who needed money when yeshiva guys had money to give him his tzedakah, and as soon as it was Shabbos, he didn't hide it very well. So when that guy asked for things, we did not give him money. But besides that, you're supposed to. So therefore, since people don't handle money on Shabbos, so you don't read the Megillah on Shabbos because that would frustrate the needs of the poor. Tani Nami Hachi, the Gemara continues. We learn this in a brayta. Avli shamru kfarim makdimin liyom haknisa. Govin bo bayom umechalkin bo bayom. Even though we say that the kfarim read the Megillah early, we collect and divide them out and reallocate the resources to the poor on that day. Afal pi shamru. What do you mean afal pi? Even though adrala mishum da amruhu. Ella, you're right. Since we moved the Megillah reading earlier for the people who live out in the towns, out in Milwaukee, Mashiach, I don't know. No, Milwaukee, you have actual cities there. You live in the actual city. What? You live in the inner city. Okay, good. Govin b'mayom v'chalkin b'bayom mipnei she'aniyim she'eineihem she'aniyim nisuot b'mikra Megillah aval simcha eina noheget ela bizmana. But simcha, which we'll see what that means, presumably the meal, but we'll get to it, only applies on the day of Purim itself. So this is the Gemara's presentation. So the main conceptual question that I want to deal with, at least today, is, okay, when Bnei Yerushalayim on Purim Meshulash read Mikra Megillah on Yudalid, what is the status of that reading? There's two conceptual ways of viewing it. One is that it's considered Kriat Shelo Bizmana. Meaning, really, you should be reading on Tetvav, which is Shabbat. But because of whatever ancillary reasons, so we know that there's a mechanism in place called Makdimin, that we can have you read at an earlier time. So even though normally people who live in a city, walled or not, do not take advantage of the rule of Makdimin, and rather they read Bizmana, because of the problems of the reading of the Megillah on Shabbat, even though conceptually speaking, that's when you should read it, we take advantage of the mechanism called Makdimin, of reading early. And therefore, Yudalid, for people living in Yerushalayim, is considered Shelo Bizmana, and for people living outside of Yerushalayim, is considered Kriya Bizmana. Or do we say that no, when Bnei Yerushalayim, Bnei Krach read on Yudalid, that is considered zmana. Right? It's not conceptually parallel to the people living in little villages who read on the 11th, 12th, or 13th. We know this, right? I didn't have to spell that out, right? That's the first mission in Megillah, right? That the people who live in the Kfarim, they would read on the market day. So the preceding Monday or Thursday, we knew that. Okay, I was making sure we knew that. So, what would you say? From the Gemara, what would you guess? What would you guess? Is it considered part of the Takana? Is it considered Kriya Bismana? Is it considered Kriya Shelo Bismana? What would you guess? So Kfarim is definitely Shelo Bismana, right? Right? When they read on the 11th, 12th, that's the definition of Shelo Bismana. But Yerushalayim on your Dalid, what is it? Bismana or Shelo Bismana? Right? Meaning it is Bisman for everybody else, but it's not their normal time. So what would you say? It's considered Bismana or Shelo Bismana? So Rami says Shelo Bismana. Why do you say Shelo Bismana? He says because it's not Bisman. Very good. Okay. Why would you say Bismana? Right? A priori, why would you say Bismana?
Because those are one of the two main.
Yeah, because maybe you'd say it's one of the two main days. Right? So even before you got to the Gemara, you can see it both ways. On the one hand, you're not pushing to a random day. You're pushing to the day that everybody else celebrates Purim. So you might say Zman. On the other hand, it's not the day that people in Yerushalayim normally read. So maybe it's Shelo Bismana. What about in the Gemara? What do you think? What does the Gemara point to? And you don't have to have one answer. It depends, right? Tell me both for Rabbah, tell me for Rabbi Yosef.
Okay, so the it would so Yosef is saying that it's for these right?
Yosef says it's for the anim, and therefore what?
Okay.
Bismana, Shelo Bismana. What would you say? Start with Rabbah. According to Rabbah, what does it sound like?
So according to Rabbah, that's
Bismana, Shelo Bismana. What do you think? Ezra, what do you think? According to Rabbah, who says the reason you don't read Megillah on Purim, on Shabbat, is because you might carry. What do you think? Is moving it to your Dalit considered Bismana, Shelo Bismana? Yeah, right. I think at first glance, Rabbah sounds like it's Shelo Bismana, meaning, because what's he saying? Really, you should read on Shabbos. But if you let you read on Shabbos, you will carry. And therefore, we tell you to read on Friday, which makes it sound like it's Shelo Bismana. What about Rabbi Yosef? So Rabbi Yosef, okay, good. So Rami says maybe he also believes it's Shelo Bismana because it's not intrinsic to Megillah. It's about the poor. But Ezra says maybe not. Because since what the Gemara is really saying is that Matana Levyonim and Megillah are intrinsically linked, so maybe the fact that Matan Levyonim can't happen on Shabbat tells you something about Megillah. Because those are intrinsically linked. Maybe.
What happens when my Matan Levyonim doesn't happen on Yudal?
What do you mean? Doesn't happen on Yudal?
Whatever it is you can't do. So I mean, on Shabbat, you can't do Matan Levyonim.
So Purim, on our current calendar, never falls. Your Dalit never falls on Shabbat.
But if it were to, then when
We'd be Makdim.
what?
You'd be Makdim. And then you always, La halacha, as we'll see, Matana Levyonim is not a suffix. Matana Levyonim is always done on the day that you read Megillah. That remains La halacha. That's the halacha.
Yeah.
That's the halacha, everywhere. In the Kfarim also.
So,
That's what the Gemara just said. Even the Kfarim, if they read on the 11th, they do Matana Levyonim on the 11th. Matana Levyonim is connected to Megillah. Matana Levyonim is connected to Megillah.
So I'm having trouble like how this is. I feel like it's almost like a little bit of like a hidden zero, I was saying that there wanted to be like a problem of handling money on Shabbos, right? So therefore people won't have money on Shabbos. So therefore.
Yes, I understand the problem, which is, wait a second, what's the problem giving for money in Shabbat? Isn't that derabanan? How does that? I understand. Maybe it's by carrying. Yeah, I get it. I understand the problem. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay.
It goes to suggest that this really doesn't seem any functionally any different than what you.
I understand. So I said Rami believes that even Rabbi Yosef sounds like it's external to the takana, and therefore it's considered shalom bismana. Very good. Right? Ezra says maybe not. Okay, so if you look at Turei Even, the Turei Even is who? Who wrote the Turei Even?
Rabbi Ginsburg, the Shagos R.J.
Thank you. Yes, Rabbi Ginsburg, yes. The same person who wrote the Shagos R.J, the Gurud R.J, same person, yes?
A similar story to the other person. The Gaon who was actually they had time he got one half an hour.
Yeah. Okay. So Turei Even asked this question head on, and he says, now, the Turei Even comes at this question from a slightly different angle, which is that the normal rule is that once there's a gzera, is another Beit Din allowed to overrule that gzera? Only if they're gadol mimenu b'chokhmah u'b'minyan. Right? Only if they're greater than them in number and wisdom. And b'chokhmah u'v'minyan. Gadol mimenu b'chokhmah u'v'minyan. No one knows. There's a lot of different shittas. I mean, average intelligence means the intelligence of the Rosh HaBezdin. Who knows? And what about all the times where we seem to break that rule? Slight problem. You can ask Ray Brody, okay? Ray Brody wrote his dissertation on this topic. You can ask him. I still haven't gotten around to reading it. I still mean to. I still have to get a copy from him so that I can read it. Because there will be I don't know how many people in the world read dissertations, There's always that small cadre of people who bother reading them. I'm sure it's excellent. What? There are people who read it, people who like reading long, detailed research projects. Dissertations? Usually, what? Halavai dozens. No, usually, I think it's more usually they're more like 500 pages. Yeah. I remember when I was in YU, I had certain professors who forbade us from reading it. I had one professor who's like, don't read my dissertation. It is the most boring thing known to mankind. He was an excellent teacher of Tanakh, but he wrote his dissertation only on, I think, light metaphors in Yeshayahu, and it was 500 pages, which was nothing compared to Kohler's dissertation, which I will never. Nothing could ever get me to read it. It was I think 750 pages or something on the Akkadian words, verbs related with metal cutting instruments, and it's and maybe also the nouns. It might have been, I think it was debating if it's verbs and nouns or I think it was the Akkadian or Ugaritic verbs related to cutting with metal instruments. It was yeah, it's not the type of thing I find fascinating.
Why?
Well, look, there are certain things. There's certain people love this. I have friends who are really into philology. So the few people who are really into philology can read this forever. I cannot. So I had there's a professor in YU who's an excellent philologist, really excellent philologist, studies the history of words and how they came to being and stuff like that. But he his, I don't know if it's his dissertation or just what he's known for, is a 2-volume book on whether or not shin used to be something lateral, something. There's I have any idea what I'm talking about, right? It was the history of the letter shin or something. Or Tzadi, or I think he has a book on both. So I have people who really liked it. I can't read it.
How do you read it?
I don't know. I can't do it. I don't have that. I can't do it. Fine. So Turi Evan says. So according to Rabbah, he says it's not a problem. Why is it not a problem? Because he says Rabbah didn't uproot the takana of the Megillah. What did he do? He set a siyag on top of the gzera of the rule of Megillah. Meaning what? Well, meaning what? No, it's not. It's not the same. Why is it not the same? Don't tell me why it is the same. Tell me why it's not the same.
Okay, because it still exists.
Because it still exists, and we do this to biblical law also.
Oh,
right? Meaning he's saying, no one's saying that the rabbis got rid of shofar. They're just saying the rabbis have the right to tell you to, in practice, not to perform the mitzvah. So he says, so Rami says, oh, I don't understand. Isn't this Rabbanan to begin with? Not necessarily, because you could say maybe it's different in Nevi'im, maybe it's in middle status, I don't know. Solve it however you want. But therefore he says, according to Rabbah, one second, he says, he says, when we say you can't uproot what the rabbi said, that means when you're not setting up a siyag. But we can't, when it comes to when it comes to protecting the Torah, we're allowed to even stop you from performing biblical mitzvah. So we can let you do that with rabbinic ones, as well as we just saw. But then he says, skipping down the line, he says, what about Rabbi Yossi? But according to Rabbi Yossi, there's a problem. Because it sounds like before Shaitaima, the Inkaran Megillah b'Shabbat Mishnei Name Shani Megillah. He doesn't sound like he's doing that. He sounds like they're moving it to help the poor people. Now, if that's the case, it sounds like they're moving the mitzvah itself, and that should be usher. So what's the Turei Evan solution? That according to Reb Yosef, it's part of the Ikar Takana. That what Chazal are saying is they're not saying about Takana, they're saying Mordechai and Esther build this into the system, L'tovat Aniyim. That the Anshe Knesset Agdola, when they originally set up the Chiyuv to read Megillah, they set it up in such a way that you'd be able to give tzedakah. And therefore they said, Anshe Knesset Agdola Atzman Tikdu Lahakdim. So according to the Turei Evan says the question of whether this is internal or external, and therefore whether it's considered Bismana or Shelo Bismana, right, hangs on the machloket of Rabbah versus Rabbi Yosef. Now, theoretically, you could have a different position, which is to say, it's not part of the original takana, but it's still considered bismana because Yodalid is still the normal Purim, right? So you could say it's not part of the original takana, but it's still called mana because when you're moving it to Yodalid, that's different than moving it to Yod Gimel, right? And there's different variations of how you could get to that point. So one would be simply to say, like Rami said, which is, Purim is Purim is Purim. I think Rami said it, maybe Yaakov said it. The other way to say it is the way the Yerushalmi says it, which is the notion that Yom Yudalid, and we'll see this if you want. Whatever, you can turn to the Yerushalmi for a minute, number 10, but basically the Yerushalmi has the position that Yudalid is considered Yom Kriya Lakol. It's considered Yom Kriya Lakol. It's the day of reading for everybody. So it could be that Yudalid is different, that therefore it's always considered Bisman, even if it's not part of the original Takana. So if you look at the version here in the Yerushalmi says, Chal Lisyot B'Chamishi, if it falls on Thursday, Kfarim Vayarag Dalo Karim Baba Yom Mukafat Chomal Machar. So then cities and Kfarim read on the 14th, which is Thursday. Places, cities with walls read it on Friday. Chal Yod Erev Shabbat. If it's on Friday, Kfarim Makdim and Liyom HaKnisa. So the Kfarim read it on Thursday, which is the 13th. Vayarag Dalo Mukafat Chomal Karim Baba Yom. Right, the people in and out of Yerushalayim, let's say, read it on the 14th. Chaliyot b'Shabbat. If Shabbat is the 14th, which again, according to our calendar, can happen. So Kfarim v'Ayarot Gedolot Makdim Liyom HaKnisa. So everyone reads it on Thursday. Umukavar Choma l'Machar, except for the people who normally read on the 15th, and then they read on Sunday. So the Yerushalmi then says, Bon kumei Rabbi Zeira, ite chamichal yot b'chachem b'Shabbat, kor b'ever Shabbat. In cities with walls, if it falls on Shabbat, I mean the 15th falls on Shabbat like it does this year, so you read on Friday. Chal yot layarot b'Shabbat. But if 14th falls on Shabbat, why don't you yidchul yom haknisa? Why do you say go back to Thursday? Say go to the 15th. That's not Yavor after the 15th. So Amarav lo mibnei kavod krachim shlo omrim reinu krochal ve'era korin ka'achat. So he says maybe it's kavod of the krachim, so people won't think that the krachim and the ayarot are equivalent. Me'ata lo yitchul yom haknisa shlo omrim reinu kvarim ve'ayarot korin ka'achat. So then you shouldn't move them to Thursday either, because then people will equate regular cities with villages, which is also apparently degrading. Me'ata chaliyot b'sheni, chaliyot b'chamishi. And besides, it can't be, because if the 14th is a market day, then we do equate the cities and the kfarim anyways. Chaliyot b'shabbat, ashkach tani kfarim v'ayarot krachim korin ka'achat, v'ain kfarim v'ayarot korin ka'achat. So me'ata chaliyot b'sheni, chaliyot b'chamishi, chaliyot b'shabbat, ashkach tani kfarim v'ayarot krachim korin ka'achat, v'ain tanya v'lo nosav afilu b'iriyeh, just like shall yifnu krachim v'ayarot, de'itlei kol shenincham makomo yidchel yom haknisa. So the Gemara says, look, once you move things, you always move it back to Yom HaKnisa. So that's why we move it back to Thursday. Rabbi Amar Kulam Yidchul Yom HaKnisa, De'itle Shelo Yagnimu Krachim La'Yarot, etc. So then Rabbi Yossi K'matniza Bon Kamei Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yossi has Rabbi Zera. Kama Damat Omar Chaliot L'Krachim B'Shabbat. When the 15th falls on Shabbat, Korim B'Erev Shabbat. Chaliyot L'Erev B'Shabbat Yikru B'Erev Shabbat. Why don't we tell, when it falls on Thursday, when Yudalid falls on Shabbat, why don't we tell you to read on Friday? So again, it must be because whenever we move it to the Yom HaKnisa. So then, second. Did I not put that one line? It could be I didn't put that one line. Okay, we'll hold it then. This Yerushalmi will become important in a minute, but it's not. I thought the line was here as well, but I guess it was not. But the Yerushalmi, I guess, elsewhere says, I guess this is Halacha Gimel, I think it's Halacha Aleph, that maybe Yudal is Yom Kriyat Lakol. Okay. L'may nafkamina. Why does it matter? Why am I spending time on figuring out whether or not it is considered part of the takana or at least mana? Why does that matter to me? So, nafkami number one is that what does the Gemara say, the continuation of the Gemara say in Megillah Daf Hey? What's one major difference between Kriya Bizmana Shlo Bizmana? Number two here. Amarav Megillah Bizmana Koran Tafil Biachid. Shlo Bizmana B'Asara. Because Rav says that when it's Bizmana, you can read with or without a minyan. But when it's Shlo Bizmana, you can only read with a minyan. Rav Asi argues, and Omar Bein Bizmana Bein Shlo Bizmana B'Asara. Rav Asi says, you always need a minyan. Rav Asi, and then the Gemara tells the whole story that once they were machmer like Rav Asi, Rav Achi, does Rav really machmer that Amar Rav Yehuda Brei Rav Shmuel Bar Shelah Mishmei Rav Purim Shcholir b'Shabbat Erev Shabbat Zmanam. When Purim falls on Shabbat, Friday is the Zman. Erev Shabbat Zmanam, but Shabbat Zmanam who? Isn't Shabbat the time? Allah Hachi Kamar. Isn't what it says? Shalom Zmanam Kizmanam. Doesn't it mean that when Purim falls on Friday, on Shabbat, so then Friday, when you read, that's considered Zmanam. In the sense that you can read even B'Yachid. Lo! Le'inyan Mikra Megillah B'Asara. So no, for Mikra Megillah you still need 10. My Erev Shabbat Zmanam. What does it mean the Erev Shabbat is Zmanam? Lafuke Midarebi Damarhov and Nidchayrav Mkom Yidchol Yom HaKnisa. Kamashon Erev Shabbat Zmanamu. To teach you that you don't move them back to Thursday. That the Krachim, when you don't read on Shabbat, they read on Friday with the Ayarot, and they don't move it back to Thursday just because it was moved. Okay? So what you see is that the Gemara says, Bizmanam, you have to read with a minyan. Shelo Bizmanam, Bizmanam you can read even without a minyan. Shelo Bizmanam you have to read with a minyan. According to the more Mekil position, right? According to Rav, Ravasi says you always need a minyan, right? But Ravasi says at least Shelo Bizmanam you need. But the Gemara is not entirely clear whether in the Maskana we think that B'nai Krach, reading on the 14th, on Friday, is considered Zmanam or Shelo Bizmanam. And therefore, whether or not they need a minyan. So, to figure out halacha l'maisa, we got to figure out a few things. Why is it that Shelo Bizmanam you dafka need a minyan? And how demanding is this chiyuv that you need a minyan? And is the 14th considered Zmanam or Shelo Bizmanam? So let's deal with those three questions. One, why do you think Rav holds that you need a minyan Shelo Bizmanam?
So I think that was,
or why don't we start the other way? Why would you say that you always need a minyan? What would the logic be to say you always need a minyan? Okay, good. That's the answer to everything in Megillah, right, Ezra? The answer to everything in Megillah is Pursumei Nisa. So the reason to say you always need a minyan is just, well, Pursumei Nisa. Since it needs to be publicized, it needs to be public. That's sort of definitional. Okay, good. So why would you say that only Shelo Bizmana you need a minyan?
So then, what okay, so I guess I like one concept that I think is pretty solid, like another which is like weak. So like there's like one is that like I think like when it's Bizmana, then like I think there's a natural atmosphere of opportunity to this. I don't think you need to go out of your way to really express it. But like when it's low Bizmana, then like you need to do something extra, such as having a formal meeting where you read Megillah to establish.
Okay, so one, good. So possibly, so what Rami says is, look, when is the right time? The context provides the Bir Simanes, provides everything you need to make it public, because everyone's reading at this time. This is the normal day of Purim, right? Purim is in the air. So therefore, whether or not there are technically 10 people hearing the Megillah, it is public. It feeds into the publicity of Kriat HaMegillah. Okay, fine. But Shelo Bizmanam, where that's not the case, meaning it's a normal work day. It just happens to be the day you read the Megillah, so you need to go out of your way and make a big fuss to make it clear that it's the Megillah, right? Or something like that.
Second construct, which is I think it's the angel normally
sure. So
according to the position that like you move, like you don't want like worry about like curve that falls out like on like Shabbos, like we're concerned that like.
Well, forget Shabbos for a minute. I'm just talking about in general. Shelo Bizmana. Why would you say Shelo Bizmana need a minyan? So Rami said because when the context isn't clear. Okay, so look at the Rajba. The Rajba says, look at his answer. He said, look, Rav always thinks that it's best, obviously, to read it with a minyan, because Rov Amadrat Melech, right, it's more glorious for God when things are done in public, and but it's annoying sometimes to get a minyan together, and therefore we don't make you do it. Hilkach. And therefore, that's why when the tzibur is reading, we still tell you that you don't do the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash and you don't learn Torah, because even Rav agrees that ideally you should have a minyan, and therefore you should go and hear it in shul. It's not just 10, it's even if you have 100, or you try to get as many as you can. And he said, this notion of Rishon is so central, that's why we tell the little cities, the little villages, to go back to the Yom HaKnesses, they do it all together. So we said, look, you know, when you're moving earlier, right, it's even more important. So, you know, because that's when you really have to create the Purim Meshulash. Maybe not b'diavad, but it's still more important. Okay. Is it ma'akev though? When we say that you need 10, there's two ways of reading that. One is to say b'diavad, meaning bismana, you can be outset. You really should go to a shul, but if you can't, you can read privately. And shalom bismana, even if you can't for everything scrape together a minyan, too bad, you just can't read the Megillah. Possibility one. Possibility two is that no. These are just different gradations of lechatchila. Meaning, everyone agrees you shouldn't ideally read it by yourself. Bismana, it's like nice to read it with a minyan. And Shalom Bismana is really, really, really nice to read it with a minyan. But if you really, 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 really can't, then even Shalom Bismana is not ma'akev. That is a machloket rishonim. The Rif and others seem to hold that the stronger position, which is Shalom Bismana. If you don't have a minyan, you can't read it at all. So look at the Rif. Amarav, Megillah Bismana Koranto B'Yachid, Shalom Bismana Koranto B'Asara. Verasi Amar Ben Bismana Ben Shalom Bismana Koranto B'Asara. Have uvda b'choshlei Rav l'Deravasi v'acha gav d'choshlei Rav l'Deravasi kaimelon kirav. The Rav Yochanan koi kavatei damar l'kamon. We pass like Rav, like Rav Yochanan Baskin later. Rav Chia b'Rav Rav Yochanan Koran Megillah Aktuva ben Aktuvim lo yatsa. That if you read the Megillah in a Tanakh rather than from a separate Megillah, lo yatsa, v'lo amru ela b'tzibor, there's only b'tzibor, avo b'yachid yatsa. But yachid you can, ashmina the koronato b'yachid, kirav damar bizmana koronato b'yachid. Now, from the implication of the Rif, it really sounds like he means this is b'diavad, meaning, right, because the way he distinguishes is there's Yachid, there's Rabim. You can only read it Bismana with Rabim, and that's why you could read it, and that's why you can distinguish so sharply between Bismana, Shalom Bismana, Yachid, and Sibor in terms of whether you have to read from a separate Megillah or a Tanakh. Other Rishonim, like the Ritva, say, no. No one thinks that B'diavad you can't do it. V'nir Dvarim Shelo Chalku El Lechatchila. This is entirely on the level of lechatchila, but b'diavad, it's not a problem. So one nafkamina, therefore, is going to be if you paskin that even b'di'eved, you need a minyan shalom bismana. So then that means what are you going to have to do? You have to get a minyan to read on Friday in Yerushalayim, but not outside of Yerushalayim. Now that's important because I got a shayla just 2 days ago. Someone said there's a chance that they'll be managed to get in one of these few flights that are coming in from America. And what will happen? They're going to be stuck in a quarantine hotel. So how do they read Megillah? What's the problem? If they put them in according to this, if they put them in Yerushalayim, so then according to Tosfot, according to Rif, if they can't scrape together a minyan, it's not worth their time to read the Megillah. right? But according to the Ritva, it is, because it's only lechatchila. Even Rav is only saying lechatchila. So there's a big nafkamina here, right? So if you hold that A, it's considered shelo bizmana, and B, you hold that shelo bizmana needs a minyan, then he's stuck. But if you hold either like the Ritva, that it's only lechatchila, or you hold that Kriat HaMegillah in Yerushalayim is bizmana, so then he doesn't have to go for a minyan. He doesn't have to worry about it, right? This is a big difference. So what do we say? So is Yerushalayim considered mana or not? So if you look at the Ritva in 7 next Ritva says, Megillah shelo bizmana de gomer perish. Rashi zal hainu yud aleph yud bet v'yud gimel d'bnei akvarim. What is shelo bizmana? 11th, 12th, 13th. But what about the 14th? Right, what about this? So he says, look at the next line. V'achirim pershu. Others say, the high shelo bizmana, hainu kshal yudalo d'va b'shabbat, shakrachim o'yarot magdim l'yom ha'knisa l'erev shabbat v'nachon. But then the Ritva says, and others say, that even when Tedvav falls on Shabbat and you move it back to Friday, that's considered shelo bizmana. So the Ritva tells you that according to Rashi, shelo bizmana is only if it's not on the 14th or the 15th. But the 14th, presumably, even for Bnei Yerushalayim, is considered Zmana. The Ritva says, no. For Bnei Yerushalayim, Friday is considered Shelo Bizmana. Look at the Rambam. The Rambam in 8 says, Kate Chal Arba Asar Liyot B'Echad B'Shabbat, Makdimin v'korin b'chamishi shu yom echad asar, chali b'shlish korin b'sheni shu yom shlosha asar, chali b'rvi'i korin b'sheni shu shnei asar, v'chol elu shu makdimin v'korin kodem arba asar, ein korin o b'vachot me'asara. If you read earlier than the 14th, then you need a minyan. So the Or Sameach makes a deal. What does the Rambam seem to say? On the one hand, the Rambam paskins l'chumra on the question of whether you need a minyan. It sounds like, for the Rambam, even b'diavad you need a minyan. But, very good. But he sounds like he's saying only Kodem Yudalid is considered shelo bizmana, and that's what the Or Sameach is medayik. He says, "V'zeh shediik rabbeinu v'lashon v'chol shemagdimin v'korin Kodem Yudalid avol b'nei mukafin b'Yudalid korin b'yachid v'afilu chal b'Shabbat." And he notes that this is like the Yerushalmi. This is the Yerushalmi that I quoted, the second line. What's the logic? The Amar Shem Yerushalmi shakol yotin b'Yudalid shizman kriya lakolhu. Because Yudalit is never considered shelo bizmana, because it's called the Yom Kriya Lakol. All the Hakdamot are only what we read in the Yerushalmi in 10, when we're going back to Thursday or Monday. But going to Yudalit is considered Yom Kriya Lakol. So again, let's review. Question 1. Is reading for B'nai Krachim on Friday, on Yudalit, considered part of the original Takana or not? The Turei Even thinks that might depend on Rava versus Rav Yosef. That Rava says, no, really you should be reading on Shabbat, but we have an external concern that you might be Mechal Shabbat, so we move it to Friday. Rav Yosef, who says that it's about the Aniyim, that in order to make that Zera, you would have to be Gadol Menu Chalkom Minyan, so therefore he argues, no, it must be that it's part of the original Takana. Even if you think it's not part of the original Takana, so then you have to ask, is Yudalit considered Zmana or Shelo Zmana? Rashi says, Zmana. The Rambam seems to say Zmana. Why would you say Zmana? Because maybe Yudalit is Yom Kriya Lakol. Right? The Yudalit is objectively Purim, whereas the 13th, the 12th, and the 11th are just possible days to read the Megillah, but they're not actually Purim. Ritva says, it's Shelo Bizmana. Nafkamina is, what about, do you need a minyan? So, since Rav holds that Bizmana you don't need a minyan, Shelo Bizmana you need a minyan, then you have to figure out how strongly does he believe that. The Rif in the Rambam thinks that's true even b'diavad. The Ritva says that's only l'chatchila. So now let me ask you the shayla. someone is stuck in a Corona hotel in Yerushalayim, they can't get a minyan for Megillah this coming Friday. Should he read B'yachid? What do you paskin? Yaakov paskin, yes. Why does Yaakov paskin? Yes. So he says 8 doesn't hurt, but conceptually, what do you have to say? Either it considers mana, or even Shalom is mana, you only need a minyan l'chatchila. Right? So let's see what the halacha is. You're right. Don't worry. You're right. You are obviously correct. But let's see. So look at 11. Shulchan Aruch writes, Megillah b'Yudalad v'Tedvav tzorech lazor achar asara. On Yudalad and Tedvav, you should go for a minyan. V'im efshar be'asara koranda b'yachid. But if you don't have a minyan, so you can read a b'yachid. Meaning you always have a minyan l'chatchila. But bismana, if you don't have a minyan, it's fine. The Ramah says, V'yesh l'stapek im nashim mistarpot l'asara. We have a suffix whether women count for this minyan. Fascinating topic, but not for this year. We'll touch on it in a minute, but not the full topic. And if there is a minyan locally, but he didn't hear it, so he can read it biyachid, because he sort of taps into it. The Mishnah Brura says, B'Yudal v'Tedvav, Hainu Yudal l'Ayarot v'Tedvav l'Mukafin. Mr. Brewer understands Shulchan Aruch to mean 14 for people outside Yerushalayim, 15 for people in Yerushalayim. V'Rat Lomar meaning Av Shehuz Mana v'Ika B'Shumei Nisa B'Lav Hachi Shakol Korantos Bizman Afilu Hachi Tzarech L'Trol L'Kabet HaSarah. That even Bizman ideally you should have a minyan because of B'Shumei Nisa. Fine. But look down third line. But he says, "Oh, Dimitrame Yom Tedvav B'Shabbat." But what happens if Shabbat is the 15th? Shabbat, and now they have to read on Thursday. Bivadai tzarech lekabez asara lekriyato. V'zeh od chama yoter dileka asara lo yavar chama kafin aleh. So what does the Mishnah Berurah say? Yerushalayim on Friday, if you don't have a minyan, really, you're not Yosei. And therefore, even if you want to read it, like Yaakov says, what could it hurt? What does the Mishnah Berurah say? There's still one nafkamina, which is read it without a bracha. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Ikra Din Paskins, that Friday is considered Zmana or Shalom Bizmana. Shalom Bizmana. And he holds the Shalom Bizmana Junior Minyan B'diavad? Yes. And therefore, even if, well, maybe it can't hurt to read it because you'll be Yosef according to Shem Shitot, La'alacha, he says, since Meikar Dini Paskins negative on all those questions, you read it without a bracha. Yes. And that's the Ramah, but yes. On the other hand, many poskim disagreed with the Mishnah Berurah, and if I gave you, for example, number 14, Rav Ovadia gives you a summary, and Rav Ovadia says no. He says, he quotes the Rav Chaim Sonnenfeld, and he quotes the Pri, and he says, Sha'ikr d'bnei krachim shemagdimin lekrot v'yudalad chajiv shafir bizmana. He says no. Yudalad is considered zmana, and therefore, ein tzarech asara. You don't need a minyan. And he says, Shekain eskim ladina, that's what the Bnei Binyamin says ladina. And he says, V'chein haroi ki halacha l'maisa, that's the practical halacha. And not only is that what you should do, he says, that's the position of Tukachinsky, ukvar poshat hamino kain, ve'ein v'zeh kol shat l'safek brachot. That's the halacha, and not only do you read, but you read with a bracha. Right, with a bracha. Now there is obviously one. There is one more kula, which I don't know if you caught, which is another avenue for kula, and that is the Ravid, which the Shulchan Aruch quotes. Which is, what did he say? That what does it mean to not have a minyan? That there's no minyan in the city. But the Ravid thinks that if there's a minyan in the city, even though you can't make it, you can read biyachid with a bracha, because maybe minyan doesn't mean that you need to be part of the minyan. It means you need to sort of tap into the energy of minyanness. So, right, that's what Shulchan Aruch said. So if you look at the base, just look at 13. Just look at 13, 1 second. Or Chol Chaim comes of a Rai, Verichriya. But Omer, the Olam bin Nasara, Mibavakam, Sheitzim Shkaru Basara, and Yeshem Yachid, or Yechid, or Zogrimam, Yochel Rabbi Yachid. Kavan Shaya, Be'ir Pirsum, the Kriat HaTzibur. The Rai, it says, if there was a minion anywhere in the city, so then the Yachid can read, because you're tapping into the Pirsum Anes of the city. So yet another reason to be Mekel would be the Ravid's position, which is, it doesn't mean you need a minion. It needs that you need to be in a city where they're being mafarsa in the nace through Kriat HaMegillah b'minyan. You tap into tziburnus. So therefore, on balance, right, because of the Ravid and because of Ravadia, whatever, it definitely seems to be the case that the person the Kronatel should read with a bracha, right, etc. Okay? Let me give you a few more nafkaminas that I didn't give you on the sheet, okay? And then tomorrow we'll deal with the Suda question. Good. So we got the Megillah question done in one day. Here's some other nice nafkaminas. One is, next nafkamina is nashim. Kriat nashim. Why is this different? Because it's possible that women are only allowed to read for themselves, not as part of a minyan, when it's zmana. But when it's shalom zmana, they need a minyan, right? Simple, related point. So that might be a second nafkamina, right? According to the Mishnah Brura, therefore you would say that even though women are normally allowed to have their own Kriat HaMegillah, that's not objectionable. This year, the women in Yerushalayim would have to go to shul. And Reluchamstein, my Mori Rabbi Reluchamstein, passed in that way. And normally he let seminaries do their own all-women Megillah reading, but when it falls like this, he told Lindenbaum, right, when it was Lindenbaum, they couldn't do it. Right? Because it's Shalom Bismana, and therefore you need a minyan. Right? So you can't, and definitely Lechatchila you need a minyan, so you shouldn't, therefore Lechatchila set up a Kriya of Nashim, even though Yesh stop it, because as we saw, women might count for the minyan here. Others said no. Right? Others felt that since certain poskim think that women can be part of the minyan, and because Me'ikra Din we paskin it's Zmana, so therefore, it shouldn't be a problem, and I think that's actually the minhag in many of the seminaries, right? It's a pasuk like that. Both of them have very, right? Both of them have what to rely on, but that's what it would, right? That's what it would depend on. A third nafkamina is the following interesting question. Can you read along with the Chazan, with the Baal Koreh? So normally, which the Chazon Ish says, and in general, if you read along with the Baal Koreh, it's called Kriya B'Tzibor, and the Brisker Rav said it's not. What? It's called part of Kriya B'Tzibor, meaning if you read, Kriya B'Tzibor, if you read along with the Baal Koreh in your own Megillah, so you integrate into the Kriya B'Tzibor, the Brisker Rav said no, you don't. Right? So Rav Rimon notes that theoretically there should be an nafkamina, because according to this, outside Yerushalayim, Bismana, since Lechatchila you can read a biyachid, the only din is Pirsum Anes. So if you're in shul, right, even though you're reading by yourself, clearly you're part of Pirsum Anes. There's no problem reading your own Megillah. But if you're in Yerushalayim on Gedalid, since they're either reading the minyan is ma'akev, or at least a much stronger Lechatchila, you shouldn't be allowed to read along with the Baal Koreh. Right? The Rimon notes that maybe this is only when you're off by like a word or two. Right? Meaning if you manage to be like verbatim, word for word with the Baal Koreh, so maybe you'd say everyone would agree that you integrate into it. But that's another potential one. The fanciest nafkamina is, you want the fanciest nafkamina? Fine. someone who becomes bar mitzvah on Shabbos in Yerushalayim. Why? Because if you hold that what? Really the chiyuv was me'ikra din on Friday, so then he missed it. Right? No big deal. Right? He just wasn't a gadol. But if you say that what? Friday Shalom Bismana, but me'ikra din he's chayiv to read on Shabbos. So, everyone else, they were supposed to read on Shabbos, but they were yosei by reading in Shalom Bismana on Friday. But the kid, since he couldn't have read it at the level of a gadol on Friday, so then he would be the one person, what does he have to do? He has to read it on Shabbos. Right? Because everybody else, okay, because of the Rabbah or whatever, so they read it on Friday. But for him, he has no choice. The only time he's going to make it is on Shabbos. And therefore, so Reb Chaim Sonnenfeld, Paskin Limaisa, that because Yodal is considered Shalom Bismana, if a kid became Bar Mitzvah on Shushan Purim, and this year, he has to read for himself on Shabbos, because Yodal doesn't count. Reb Tzipei Frank, Reb Buzner, and Tukachinsky said, that's crazy. Right? No, you don't. No, you don't.
Doesn't it not go by doesn't it not actually go by bar mitzvah and because earlier?
No, definitely for Derabanans it does. For Deraisas you need Shtei Sarot also, but for Derabanans it's just by years.
I thought it was something like that, specifically that we don't have
we rely on Chazaka and whatever for Derabanans. It's not a problem.
I know, but it's something
not for Deraisas. But this is Derabanans. It's fine.
I don't like that. We wouldn't do that for we don't let bar mitzvah boys
No, I don't think so. Okay, good. So that is the question of Megillah reading. Tomorrow, then, we'll deal with the question of Seuda, which is sources here 16 through 21. And if we have time, we'll do a brief summary of Mishloach Manot. So we should be able to finish tomorrow, and then we got to figure out what we do. Today's only Monday, so then I have to maybe find another Purim topic. But let's. Okay, good.